I still remember the exact moment the floor was pulled out from under me. One minute, I was sitting in a crowded conference room in downtown Chicago. The next minute, the CEO slid a thick envelope across the table and told me with a straight face that my position was no longer essential. 10 years of work, gone in less than 10 seconds. The words didn't even sound real. No longer essential. I had built the systems this company runs on. I had worked nights, weekends, birthdays, keeping everything online while the executives showed off to investors. And yet, here I was being dismissed like a temporary intern they could replace at will. The worst part wasn't the firing itself. It was the smirk. That little smirk from a man who had no idea how the architecture even functioned, telling me that from now on, he controlled my career references. It felt less like a conversation and more like a warning shot. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table and remind everyone in that room that without me, nothing they bragged about would even exist. But I didn't. Instead, I forced the smallest smile I could manage. The kind of smile you give when you know something the other person doesn't. Before I tell you what happened next. Where are you listening from? And let me ask you something deeper. Have you ever been treated like you were invisible at work? Like your value could be erased with a symbol signature? Leave a comment if this stirs up a memory. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. I walked back to my desk in silence. No one said a word. You could almost hear the fluorescent lights buzzing above me, louder than the people I had spent years working beside. My chair was still warm from that morning, my coffee half finished, my notes from the last system update open on the screen. For a second, it felt like time had frozen, but only for me. Everyone else had already decided to move on. I slid my notebook into my bag, carefully folded the pages I didn't want anyone else to see, and powered down my laptop. The room behind me was filled with the soft clatter of keyboards and the squeak of office chairs. Not one person turned around. It was like I had vanished before I even stood up. Part of me wanted someone, anyone, to say something, a simple "I'm sorry" or even just "good luck." But they all kept their eyes locked on their screens. Maybe they were afraid, maybe they didn't care. Either way, I realized I was already a ghost in this place. As I pulled my box of things together, a photo frame, a few pens, a plant that never really grew, I caught sight of Marcus across the aisle. He didn't speak. He just gave me a slow, deliberate nod. That tiny gesture said more than words ever could. It was acknowledgement. It was respect. It was the quiet truth that at least one person knew what had really been lost. I carried the box past the reception desk, hearing the faint echo of my own footsteps. No one followed. The glass doors closed behind me with a heavy click, as if sealing me out for good. But as I stood on the sidewalk, the Chicago wind cutting sharp against my face, I couldn't shake one thought. They believed the story was over. They had no idea it had only just begun. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the same box of belongings I had carried out of the office just hours earlier. The room was quiet, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound, but inside my head, everything was racing. Being fired in front of my peers hurt, but I knew something they didn't. The system wasn't just code. It was a map, a living blueprint. And every map has a signature, a language only its creator fully understands. I opened my laptop, not the one from the company. I had wiped that clean before handing it back, but my own. I logged into my personal email and drafted 2 messages. The first was short and polite, addressed to the company's legal department. It looked harmless, just a clarification about contributions and intellectual property. But buried between the lines was a reminder my fingerprints were everywhere in that architecture, and I had the receipts to prove it. The second email was sent to myself. Attached was a sanitized version of the design diagrams, enough to show the flow, but stripped of sensitive details. I read over the file one last time, my cursor hovering above send. A strange calm washed over me. This wasn't revenge. This was insurance, a quiet reminder that even when they tried to erase me, the foundation would still point back to my name. I leaned back in my chair and let out a slow breath. The city outside was still awake, the noise of traffic, the distant wail of sirens, but my apartment felt like a bunker, a place where I could plan, where I could regain control. I closed my laptop with a soft click, almost like sealing an envelope. To anyone else, it was just another Tuesday night. But for me, it was the first step in a move no one would see coming. And the truth is, once you set something like this in motion, you can't take it back. In the days after I left, I tried to move on with my life. I walked through the streets of Chicago like any other face in the crowd, carrying groceries, sitting at coffee shops, watching trains rumble by. On the surface, it looked like nothing had changed. But inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that part of me was still back in that office, embedded deep within the code I had written. People think of systems as lines of text commands strung together like beads. But to me, it was more like a building. Every layer had a purpose. Every connection had weight. If you removed one beam, the whole thing could tilt. I had poured years into that structure, and though they fired me, my work didn't vanish. It lived on like a ghost haunting their servers. I knew the executives didn't understand this. To them, code was just another asset, like office furniture or a logo on the wall, something you could replace. But what they missed is that systems remember their creators. The choices, the shortcuts, the little details, they all point back to the person who designed them. You can erase the name from the payroll, but you can't erase the fingerprints from the foundation. Late at night, I found myself sketching pieces of the architecture on scrap paper, tracing out flowcharts from memory. Not because I missed the job, but because I wanted to remind myself of the truth that building was mine, and without me, cracks would eventually show. I didn't know when or how it would happen, but I felt it in my bones. Systems always reveal the truth. They can carry someone's signature long after the person is gone, and sooner or later, someone was going to notice. Starting over is harder than people admit. When I first left the company, I thought about taking a long break, maybe disappearing for a while. But the truth is, I didn't know how to sit still. My entire identity had been built around solving problems, keeping systems alive. Without that rhythm, I felt like I was drifting. So I opened my laptop one morning and started from scratch. No corporate logo at the top of my documents, no team to impress, no executive breathing down my neck. Just me, a blank screen, and the knowledge I had carried for years. I rewrote my resume, this time stripped of buzzwords and corporate fluff. Instead of collaborated with cross-functional stakeholders, I wrote the truth. Designed and deployed infrastructure that carried 92% of platform traffic without failure for 4 straight years. Reading it back, I almost laughed. For once, the words felt real. Slowly, I reached out to a few contacts, not with desperate applications, but with quiet offers. Short consulting gigs, small businesses that needed stability, startups drowning in their own messy code. It wasn't glamorous, but it reminded me who I was, the person who could walk into chaos and leave order behind. I found comfort in the simplicity. No late-night politics, no boardroom drama, just problems, solutions, and the satisfaction of making things work again. And each time I solved one, I felt a piece of myself returning. Still in the back of my mind, I knew something bigger was coming. Systems don't forget. Cracks don't stay hidden forever. And while I was busy rebuilding myself on the outside, part of me was waiting for the moment when the ghosts of my old architecture would finally rise to the surface. Because no matter how quietly I tried to move forward, I knew the past hadn't finished with me yet. It started quietly, the way most collapses do. A delayed update here, a strange error message there. At first, it seemed like nothing more than the usual noise of a busy tech company, but I recognized the signs instantly. To me, they weren't random glitches. They were hairline fractures in the foundation I had built, cracks no one else knew how to read. I wasn't looking for them, but they kept finding me. A post on a developer forum complaining about a service outage. A frustrated Reddit thread where customers wondered why the platform was slower every week. Even a friend of mine who still worked in the building let something slip. We've been stuck on the same ticket for days. Nothing lines up. Feels like we're patching holes in a sinking ship. I remember leaning back in my chair when I read that message, the corners of my mouth curling into a quiet smile. Not because I enjoyed their pain, but because I knew exactly why it was happening. The shortcuts I had warned them about, the parts of the system that required careful handling, were all unraveling. They thought the architecture could run without me. They thought wrong. I didn't reach out. I didn't gloat. I simply watched from a distance as the pressure built. Each patch they applied only made the structure weaker, like slapping tape over a cracked dam. And with every passing week, the cracks grew louder, wider, more impossible to ignore. The truth was becoming clear. They hadn't fired an employee. They had fired the only person who knew how to keep the walls from caving in. And deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before someone came knocking on my door. It was just past 2 in the morning when my phone lit up on the nightstand. I almost ignored it. At that hour, nothing good ever comes through. But curiosity got the better of me, and I reached over to check. The message was from Marcus. He was one of the few colleagues I had trusted back at the company, the one who had given me that silent nod on the day I walked out. His text was short, but it carried weight. "Clara, did you leave or were you pushed?" I stared at the screen, half awake, half stunned. For weeks, I had watched from a distance as the company stumbled, struggling with problems they couldn't name, let alone fix. And now, in the middle of the night, Marcus was reaching out. It wasn't just curiosity. It was desperation hiding behind a simple question. I typed a reply, then erased it. What could I even say? Both? Neither? The truth was more complicated. I hadn't just been fired. I had been erased, cut out of the picture, as if the work had never been mine. But the system itself refused to forget, and that was what haunted them now. Another buzz. They're calling it a black box. Nobody understands why it's failing. People are scared. Feels like the walls are closing in. I could almost hear his voice as I read the words tired, frustrated, but also hinting at something else, a quiet recognition of what I had warned them about. I set the phone down, my heart beating faster than I wanted to admit. Part of me felt vindicated. Another part felt the weight of what was coming. Because when someone sends a message like that at 2 in the morning, it usually means the real cracks have only just begun to show. The first whispers came from industry blogs. A few lines buried in long articles. Delays at a major fintech player raise questions about stability. I skimmed them over coffee, pretending not to care, but inside I felt the ripple. The cracks I had seen from afar were no longer hidden. They were beginning to spread beyond the walls of the company. Then came the bigger wave, investors. Rumors of an acquisition had been circulating, and with rumors came scrutiny. Due diligence is a brutal process. Every log, every diagram, every unexplained failure is pulled apart by teams who are paid to find weaknesses. And when they looked at the system I had built, they didn't just find weaknesses, they found mystery. A friend forwarded me a message from inside the company. They keep asking who designed the original framework. Nobody wants to answer. It's like admitting a ghost wrote it. I sat with that sentence for a long time. A ghost. That's what I had become. Someone erased from the payroll, but still haunting every server, every error report, every audit trail. Investors don't like ghosts. They want clarity, ownership, accountability. Instead, they were handed a black box full of warnings I had written months before. And the more they dug, the louder the questions became. Tweets started to surface from junior engineers. Wildest code comment I've ever seen. If you're reading this, you fired the wrong person. The post spread fast, picked up by forums and even LinkedIn discussions. My quiet signature, once buried deep, had found the light. I leaned back in my chair, letting the screen glow in the dark apartment. It wasn't satisfaction I felt, not yet. It was inevitability, like watching a storm gather on the horizon, knowing it's only a matter of time before it reaches shore. And when that storm finally breaks, someone will be forced to face the truth out loud. The meeting was supposed to be routine. At least that's how the executives pitched it to the investors. A simple walkthrough, a chance to reassure everyone that the company was solid. But when the doors closed and the slides came on, the atmosphere shifted. It didn't take long for the questions to start. A man in a tailored suit, clearly representing one of the buyers, leaned forward and asked the simplest question of all: who originally designed the system? Silence. A silence so heavy it filled every corner of that glass-walled boardroom. The executives glanced at each other, waiting for someone brave enough to speak. No one did. The buyer didn't let up. He tapped the table lightly once, twice, like a judge calling for order. We've spent weeks reviewing your infrastructure. Logs point to decisions no one here can explain. Code comments reference someone not in the room. So I'll ask again, who designed it? The CEO shifted uncomfortably. He tried to change the subject, clicking to the next slide about growth projections. But the buyer cut him off with a sharp wave of his hand. Stop. You're asking us to purchase a product when you can't even name the person who built its foundation. Do you realize how reckless that sounds? A murmur spread around the table. The executives avoided eye contact, some staring down at their notes, others at the floor. Everyone knew the answer. Everyone knew the name. They just couldn't bring themselves to say it. Finally, the buyer stood gathering his papers with deliberate calm. His voice carried no anger, only finality. We're done here. The deal was dead in that instant. And as the investors filed out, the CEO sat frozen, the weight of what had just happened pressing down like a stone. But this was only the beginning. Because when the storm clears and the silence breaks, the next question is always the same. Who can fix it? The invitation came quietly, slipped into my inbox late one evening. No grand gestures, no formal letterhead, just a subject line that read, "Can we meet?" It was signed by someone from the executive team, a name I hadn't seen since the day they escorted me out. For a moment, I just stared at the screen. Part of me wanted to delete it, to let them drown in the mess they had created. But another part of me, the part that had spent years keeping their empire upright, knew this was the moment I had been waiting for. We met in a small, dimly lit conference room away from the main office. No one smiled, no one made small talk. They got straight to the point. The system was failing. Investors had walked. Their reputation was unraveling by the hour. I sat across from them, hands folded, letting the silence stretch before I spoke. You fired the person who built the foundation. Now the foundation is cracking. What exactly did you expect? One of the executives leaned forward, almost whispering, "We need you back, Clara. No one else understands it the way you do." For a moment, I let their words hang in the air. It was surreal hearing the same voices that had dismissed me now pleading for my return. Inside, I felt no rage, no gloating, only a steady calm. This wasn't about revenge. It was about truth finally catching up. I agreed to look at the system, but only on my terms. No titles, no empty promises. If I was going to step back in, it would be with the authority to fix what they had broken without interference. As I gathered my things to leave the room, I noticed the way they avoided my eyes. Desperation has a certain weight, and I could feel it pressing against the walls. They thought they were calling me back to save them. But in reality, this was the beginning of something else entirely. In the weeks that followed, I watched everything shift. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, almost invisibly, like a tide pulling back from the shore. The company that once treated me as disposable was unraveling, and for the first time, I wasn't the one holding it together. Their press releases grew shorter. Their updates came later. Rumors leaked out faster than official statements ever could. I didn't need to search for news. It seemed to find me on its own. A friend texted me after one particularly tense meeting. He looked like the floor had been ripped out from under him. I didn't ask who he meant. I already knew. Meanwhile, my own days took on a different rhythm. I wasn't running on caffeine and panic anymore. I wasn't staying up until 3 in the morning to clean up other people's mistakes. Instead, I worked on my own terms. Clients came, projects flowed, and for the first time in years, I had space to breathe. And yet, what struck me most was the silence. No grand apologies, no public recognition, no headlines declaring justice served. Just silence. A silence that spoke louder than any statement could. Sometimes triumph doesn't come with cheers or applause. It doesn't come with someone shaking your hand and admitting they were wrong. Sometimes it's just watching the weight of their own choices collapse on them while you stand outside untouched. I would sit by the window of my new office, sunlight spilling across the desk, and think about how different everything felt. Not sweeter, not easier, just clearer. I didn't need revenge. The truth had done all the work for me. But deep down, I also knew one thing. Stories like this never end neatly. There's always one final lesson waiting to be told. In the end, I never set foot back in that company's office. They kept calling, trying to negotiate terms, but by then, it didn't matter. The deal had collapsed, their reputation was in pieces, and the people who once thought they held all the power were left scrambling in the rubble of their own decisions. As for me, I didn't need a title or an office with my name on the door. What I gained was far greater freedom. The freedom to work with people who valued what I brought to the table. The freedom to build without fear of being erased. And maybe most important of all, the freedom to know that my worth was never defined by their approval in the first place. Marcus eventually left too. He sent me a short message months later. "You were right. I should have walked sooner." I didn't reply right away. There are some conversations that don't need long explanations. Just knowing he found his own way out was enough. Looking back now, I realize this story was never about revenge. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about surviving the fall, standing back up, and letting time do what it always does, reveal the truth. The lesson, at least for me, is simple. Don't let anyone convince you that being dismissed makes you invisible. Value doesn't disappear because someone fails to see it. Sometimes, walking away is the loudest statement you'll ever make. And now I'll leave you with a question. If you found yourself in my position, erased, underestimated, but still holding the blueprint, what would you have done?